I have been able to smell people's emotions since I was a child. Sweetness meant love. Bitterness meant grief. And a sharp, spicy sting meant anger and disgust. During my 10 years with Julian, his scent had never changed. It was always a sweet, comforting vanilla. So sweet it could rot your teeth. The only time it changed was the night my sister, Jasmine, moved abroad. When Julian came home late that night, the scent radiating from him was so bitter it made my stomach turn. But back then, I didn't connect the two events. It wasn't until 3 years later, when Jasmine came back to get married. That day, Julian's scent was a suffocating mix of bitterness and a sharp, stinging spice. It was a smell I had never encountered on him before. Frowning, I followed him out of the reception hall. In the quiet stairwell, I heard his voice low, choked, and dripping with agony. Enough, Jasmine. Just to make me give up, you'd rather marry a total stranger? Jasmine sobbed, her voice cracking. What else was I supposed to do? You're Chloe's fiancé, and Chloe is my sister. We can't keep making this mistake. I froze at the entrance. My entire body trembled with shock. It felt as if my heart was being slowly crushed in a fist, squeezing the air out of my lungs until I couldn't breathe. Right then my phone buzzed. A calendar notification popped up. Wedding with Julian next week. I stared at the screen for 2 seconds. Then, I called the venue and canceled the wedding. Through the crack in the door, I saw the two of them wrapped in a painful, desperate embrace. The scent of grief radiating from them was so thick it was almost physical. Jasmine covered her face, her shoulders shaking violently. Julian, let it go. We have to stop. She looked up at him, her eyes filled with unspeakable sorrow. I'm getting married today. Next week, you're marrying Chloe. Chloe and I only have each other. Since our parents passed away, she's my only family. Don't hurt her, I beg you. I leaned heavily against the cold wall. My chest throbbed with a million tiny needle pricks. The sheer absurdity of the situation made me want to laugh and cry at the same time. I stood there like a lunatic, not knowing what expression to put on my face. Jasmine. Julian. I had never once connected them in my mind. For the past few years, they had kept such a polite, distant boundary. They behaved like strangers, and I was the only bridge between them. During holidays, Julian would bring gifts to our house and greet her with polite formality. Jasmine would nod distantly and say nothing more than, "Please make yourself at home." Every time Julian left, Jasmine would stroke my hair, her emotions tightly suppressed. "Chloe must be happy," she would whisper. Back then, I didn't understand the deep sadness in her eyes. But now I did. Inside the stairwell, Julian shook his head. His hands shook as he desperately tried to grab hers. "Don't do this to me, Jasmine. Please." Jasmine closed her eyes and slapped his hand away. I said, "It's over. Julian, we were just never meant to be." Julian punched the concrete wall. His hand, the hand of a brilliant surgeon, was instantly covered in blood, but his eyes were redder than the blood dripping from his knuckles. "I don't care about fate. Jasmine, let's run away. Let's leave this place together." She tore herself from his grip, her gaze hardening. "I won't hurt Chloe. If you dare do anything, I will never speak to you again." He froze. His spine went rigid, like a bowstring stretched to its absolute limit. Then with a bitter, defeated laugh, all the strength drained from his body, and his shoulders slumped. "Fine. You win, Jasmine. You win. I will stay with Chloe. For the rest of my life." I closed my eyes, a mocking smile on my lips. It was all a joke. I stumbled away from the stairwell. My steps were hollow, and every drop of color had drained from my face. A short while later, Julian returned to the banquet hall and sat down next to me. "What's wrong, babe?" He gently touched the corner of my reddened eyes, his voice dripping with concern. "Have you been crying?" I looked up, digging my fingernails into my palms. He was back to his usual self, warm, gentle, and perfect. It was as if the scene I had just witnessed was nothing but a hallucination. I instinctively shrank back from his touch. "I'm fine." He didn't press. The lights in the ballroom dimmed, and his attention was immediately drawn to the grand doors at the end of the aisle. "And now, please welcome the beautiful bride." As the host spoke, Jasmine walked down the aisle in her white wedding gown. She looked at me first. When her gaze briefly brushed past Julian, it was filled with a lingering, quiet sorrow. As for Julian, his fists were clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. I watched it all play out. Taking a soft breath, a wave of cold desolation washed over me, because out of the three of us in this room, not a single one smelled sweet. Up on the stage, Jasmine was reciting her vows to her new husband. Soon, it was time for the family speeches. The host walked over with the microphone. "Now we invite the bride's only sister, Chloe, to say a few words of blessing." I reached out to take the mic. But Julian, who had been silent the entire time, suddenly stood up and snatched it first. I froze. The host froze. Everyone in the room looked on in confusion. On stage, Jasmine's body went completely rigid. She gave Julian a subtle, pleading shake of her head. Julian kept his eyes lowered, looking down at me with practiced tenderness. Let me do it. I'm afraid if you start speaking, you'll cry too hard, and my heart can't take that. Without waiting for my response, he raised the microphone. His voice echoed through the speakers, flat and devoid of real emotion, like he was delivering a business report. Chloe wants to tell you that you look beautiful today. She hopes you will be happy forever, and always stay true to yourself. If you ever feel tired or unhappy out there, you can always come home. We will always be there for you. Jasmine forced a small smile. I know. Thank you. They looked at each other from across the room, then quickly averted their eyes. Only I could smell the suffocating bitterness hanging in the air between them. The speeches ended, and the wedding proceeded smoothly. I turned my head to look at the man sitting beside me, whose mind was clearly miles away. I didn't want to say any of those things, I said quietly. Didn't you hear me practicing my speech at home? And besides, I could have said it myself. Julian snapped out of his daze. Hiding the complex emotions in his eyes, he reached out and playfully pinched my cheek. His smile was doting. The wedding hasn't even started, and your eyes are already puffy from crying. I was just worried you wouldn't make it through a single sentence. He chuckled softly. Chloe has always been so sensitive. He pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly. It was no different from how he used to hold me. If I hadn't smelled that the sweetness in his emotions had completely evaporated, I would have truly believed he loved me. Is that so? The corner of my mouth twitched into a strained smile. Then thank you. He didn't notice the edge in my voice. Jasmine had walked over to our table, raising her champagne glass to toast us. Chloe, you're getting married next week. She gently patted my head. My little sister is all grown up. I kept my eyes down, feeling a sickening wave of nausea rise in my chest, accompanied by a dull throbbing pain. She turned to Julian. Take good care of my sister. I hope you keep your promise. Julian, who rarely drank, downed his entire glass of champagne in one gulp. I will. They quickly broke eye contact. Jasmine moved to the next table, and laughter rippled through the hall. But Julian kept drinking one glass after another. I watched him the whole time. I didn't stop him. There was no point anymore. That night, Julian got dead drunk. The moment we got home, he collapsed onto the living room sofa. Jasmine. Why? Why couldn't it be us? Tell me why. I sat on the armchair nearby, listening quietly. I sat there and listened to my fiancé call out my sister's name in his drunken slumber. Suddenly, my phone rang. It was the coordinator from the wedding venue. Hi, Chloe. We noticed you canceled the wedding on our portal. Is everything okay? We just wanted to remind you that according to the contract, the deposit is non-refundable. I gave a soft hum. Yes, it's canceled. Keep the deposit. It's fine. After I hung up, Julian muttered, Chloe, my throat hurts. Get me a glass of honey water. I ignored him. I went straight to the bedroom and locked the door. I canceled the catering orders, returned the wedding decorations online, and then booked a one-way ticket to Iceland. I had always wanted to go there. Julian had always claimed he was too busy with hospital shifts. Well, now I could go alone. Lying in bed, sleep eluded me. I began to mentally retrace the steps of our 10-year relationship. The more I looked back, the more I saw the glaring red flags I had previously ignored. Like the time Jasmine moved abroad, and his mood had plummeted for weeks for no apparent reason. Or the year Jasmine graduated, and he insisted on flying across the country with me just to congratulate her. Or the way that, in every single photo of the three of us, his head was always slightly tilted toward Jasmine. I didn't know when it had started, but I knew. It was time for it to end. The next morning, when I woke up, Julian was already in the kitchen making breakfast. He had cooked for me for years, never letting me lift a finger. Morning. He set the plates on the table and asked casually, I drank too much last night. Did I say anything stupid? I stared at the strawberry jam on the table. I hated strawberry jam. Jasmine loved it. No, I replied flatly. He quietly let out a breath, but then frowned slightly. You didn't even put a blanket on me last night, and there was no honey water. I woke up freezing, and my head is splitting. I looked him dead in the eye. I am not obligated to take care of you. He froze. Julian pressed his lips together, swallowing his sudden irritation. A flicker of anxiety crossed his eyes. What's wrong? Did someone upset you? Or are you stressed about the wedding preparations? I didn't answer. I grabbed the toast smeared with strawberry jam and threw it directly into the trash can. I hate strawberries. Looking at his bewildered face, I let out a cold laugh. The one who loves strawberries is Jasmine. I walked out of the apartment and wandered aimlessly down the streets. A light drizzle was falling. It wasn't heavy enough to need an umbrella, but it was enough to knock the dead leaves off the trees, letting them rot in the mud. I stopped outside our old high school. Julian and I had been classmates here. Jasmine was a grade above us. Back then, she would always wait for me after school so we could walk home together. At some point, Julian started walking with us. Jasmine used to tease me, saying Julian was doing it because he had a crush on me and wanted to walk me home. But even though we were in the same class, we barely spoke. Yet from that day on, my eyes couldn't help but follow him. After the SATs, Jasmine encouraged me to confess my feelings to him. So I did. I remembered the shock on his face when I asked him out. But the rejection that had been on the tip of his tongue was swallowed back down. Instead he had said, "Okay." And just like that, Julian became a permanent fixture in my and Jasmine's lives. I kept walking, my hair soaked by the rain, my feet growing heavier with every step. I couldn't help but wonder, what if he only agreed to be with me so he could be closer to Jasmine? What if the sweet scent of love I had smelled on him all these years was just a lie he forced himself to project? I didn't dare go down that rabbit hole. Thinking like that would drive me insane. I squeezed my eyes shut, took a deep breath, and hailed a cab. Just as I got into the back seat, Julian's black Mercedes sped past us. "Sir, follow that Mercedes," I whispered, my voice hoarse. That direction didn't lead to his hospital, nor did it lead to his parents' house. Where was he going? The answer was screaming in my mind, but my heart clenched, too terrified to believe it. The cab took several turns and finally stopped in front of a small, charming cottage in the quiet suburbs. I never knew he owned a house here. I got out of the cab. As I walked closer, the muffled sound of an argument reached my ears. Jasmine sounded like she was on the verge of a breakdown. What did Chloe mean by that comment this morning? "Julian, you promised me she would never find out. You promised you wouldn't hurt her." Julian's jaw was clenched tight. "She won't find out. She was probably just in a bad mood. I asked her if I said anything stupid last night, and she said no." Only then did Jasmine seem to calm down. She wept softly. "In any case, this is the last time I'm coming here. We cannot contact each other ever again." Julian's voice was a soft, desperate whisper. "Really? Can you really let go of this place? We bought this cottage 5 years ago. We have so many beautiful memories here. Can you really just wipe them away? Jasmine, stop lying to yourself." Then, Jasmine threw herself into his arms, and they held each other tightly. It was so picturesque. It made me look like the cruel villain standing in the way of their true love. I couldn't hear what else they said. A loud buzzing filled my ears. As I leaned against the gate, I noticed the archway of the cottage was covered in climbing jasmines. Every corner of this place was a testament to their love. And I was nothing but a pathetic clown. A flood of memories rushed into my mind. For years ago, on New Year's Eve, both of them claimed they had to work late shifts. I spent the countdown alone. 3 years ago, on Valentine's Day, both of them said they had business trips. The romantic dinner I prepared ended up in the trash. 2 years ago, on Jasmine's birthday while she was still abroad, Julian suddenly told me he had to fly out for an emergency surgery. That same night, Jasmine's phone went unanswered. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together. The truth wrapped around my throat like a poisonous vine, cutting off my air. I went home. I didn't confront them. Not yet. I quietly packed my bags. When Julian came home later, his scent was miserable, but the moment he saw me, he forced a bright smile. He pulled me into a tight embrace. There wasn't a single trace of sweetness on him. "Chloe, I'm so sorry about the strawberry jam this morning. My brain was still foggy from last night." "Are you mad at me?" I stared at him, then let my lips curve into a wide, cheerful smile. "Of course not." He let out a sigh of relief and headed into the bathroom. My smile instantly vanished, replaced by cold indifference. 3 days after her wedding, Jasmine brought her new husband, Luke, to visit. She took my hand, her smile warm and sisterly. "Chloe is getting married. I can't be your maid of honor next week, but being able to hand you over to Julian is enough for me." I looked down at our joined hands. "Is that so? You don't feel any regret?" She stiffened for a fraction of a second, then laughed it off. "Why would I regret seeing you happy?" I murmured, pulling my hand back. She didn't notice my coldness. "I'm going to see what delicious food Julian is whipping up," she said cheerfully, heading into the kitchen. The table was set with an incredibly lavish feast. Julian was supposed to have a surgery scheduled for today. He was the kind of doctor who put his patients above everything else. But this morning, I heard him call his chief to swap shifts. Also, he could cook a meal for Jasmine. At the dinner table, the two of them sat diagonally from each other. The maximum distance possible. "Chloe mentioned you like seafood, Jasmine, so I made a seafood feast today. But don't eat too much cold seafood. It's not good for your stomach," Julian said casually. I listened in silence. Every detail he knew about Jasmine's preferences felt like a slap in my face. Because I had never told him those things. Jasmine gave a cold, polite nod, then turned to cut a piece of steak for Luke. Julian's scent turned bitter and dejected. I watched it all, feeling completely numb. Except for Luke, who was happily eating, everyone at the table was drowning in their own thoughts. In the afternoon, Luke had to head back to work. Jasmine and Julian accompanied me to my final wedding dress fitting. I stood in front of the mirror, staring at the glittering gown. I was dazed. This dress was designed by Julian himself. It was intricately embroidered with delicate white petals. I remembered the day he had proudly shown me the sketches like a boy presenting a treasure. "Chloe, I want to spend the rest of my life with you," he had said, eyes shining. "Even when we're old and gray, I want to hold your hand and look at the beautiful things we built together." I never could have imagined that in just 6 months, the truth would be laid bare. I lost my parents at 8, and now at 23, I was losing my sister and my fiancé. I wondered if I was cursed. Why was I destined to lose everything? Why could I never keep the people I loved? The boutique assistant smiled warmly as she adjusted the train of the gown. "This gown is called Pure Jasmine, Chloe. I'm guessing your sister's name inspired it." My body went completely rigid. So that was the name of the dress. Those embroidered petals weren't cherry blossoms. They were jasmines. A wave of pure disgust and absurdity washed over me. I ripped the veil off my head. The assistant gasped, startled. "Chloe, is there something wrong with the dress?" I stared at the crumpled veil on the floor, my voice hollow. "No. It's perfect. Absolutely perfect." I changed out of the dress and walked out of the fitting room. Jasmine and Julian were standing far apart, looking like polite strangers. Julian blinked in surprise. "Babe, why didn't you show us? I wanted to see you in it." I forced a smile. "If you see it now, where's the surprise on the wedding day?" Julian smiled tenderly, and Jasmine patted my head affectionately. It made my skin crawl. According to tradition, the bride and groom shouldn't see each other the night before the wedding. So Julian checked into a hotel. Before he left, he held me tightly, his heart hammering against his chest. "Tomorrow you'll finally be my wife, Chloe. I'm so happy." I nodded expressionlessly. At midnight, I packed the last of my things and headed to the airport. My flight was scheduled for 2 a.m. Before boarding, I took a photo of the suburban cottage and sent it to our 3-person Snapchat group. I didn't say a single word. I turned off my phone, stepped onto the plane and left. 12 hours later, the plane touched down in Iceland. By then, the wedding was already over. The moment I turned my phone back on, a barrage of missed calls and notifications flooded in, making my phone vibrate violently. The airport terminal in Reykjavik was vast, quiet, and smelled faintly of cold glass, ozone, and wet wool. I stood by a wooden bench near the baggage carousel, the floor trembling slightly beneath my boots as my phone vibrated continuously in my hand. 47 missed calls from Julian, 32 from Jasmine, 9 from Luke, 17 text messages from mutual friends, wedding guests, and the venue manager. I didn't open the text messages right away. Instead, I tapped on the group chat, the 3-person Snapchat group consisting of me, Julian, and Jasmine. Under the photograph of the suburban cottage, with its wrought iron gate and climbing jasmine vines illuminated under the pale yellow streetlight, there was a long trail of messages. "Jasmine, Chloe, what is this? Where are you? Why did you post this picture? Jasmine, Chloe, answer your phone. The guests are already arriving at the church. Where are you? Julian, Chloe, stop playing around. I'm standing at the altar. The minister is asking for the marriage certificate. Call me back right now. Jasmine, Julian, she knows. Oh my God, Julian, she knows about the house. Jasmine, Luke saw the photo. He just took his car and left. Chloe, please. You're ruining everything. Julian, Chloe, where are you? Where are you?" I stared at the screen, my expression completely flat. Through the glass windows of the airport, the Icelandic morning sky was a bruised shade of violet and slate gray. A light flurry of snow drifted against the tarmac. I took a deep breath through my nose. For 10 years, my nostrils had been filled with the heavy, cloying scent of synthetic vanilla. The smell Julian projected to keep me compliant, to convince me that his duty was love. Here, 3,000 miles away from home, the air tasted clean. It smelled of freezing salt water, crushed volcanic basalt, and ancient ice. It was entirely free of sweet, rotting lies. I deleted the Snapchat app from my phone, removed the SIM card, snapped it in half between my thumb and forefinger, and dropped the 2 pieces into a radiating bin beside a coffee kiosk. Then, I picked up my single duffel bag and walked out into the cold. Back in our home city, 6 time zones away, the Grand Cathedral of St. Jude was in absolute chaos. Julian stood at the front of the aisle, wearing the bespoke dark navy tuxedo he had spent 3 months getting tailored. His hair was meticulously styled, his boutonnieres made of white gardenias, a choice he had claimed was classic, but which Jasmine had quietly picked out during their secret weekend in the suburbs. 2 months prior, the organist was softly looping the entrance hymn for the 4th time. 200 guests sat in the oak pews, whispering among themselves, their glances shifting nervously between the vacant double doors at the back and the pale, sweating groom at the front. "Where is she?" Julian whispered through gritted teeth to his best man, his hand trembling so violently he had to tuck it into his trouser pocket. "She was at the apartment last night. I talked to her. She said she was happy. His best man checked his phone again, looking uncomfortable. Julian, her phone is completely off. And, did you see the photo in the group chat? Julian's face twitched. What photo? The one your sister-in-law just forwarded to your mother, the best man murmured, lowering his voice. It's a picture of that cottage in Oak Ridge. The one you said you bought as an investment property 3 years ago. Julian's blood went cold. Before he could respond, the heavy double doors at the rear of the cathedral burst open. It wasn't the bride. It was Luke, Jasmine's new husband of 3 days. His tie was crooked, his suit jacket unbuttoned, his face flushed dark red with pure, unadulterated fury. He marched down the center aisle, his heavy leather shoes slapping against the marble floor, echoing off the high vaulted ceiling. The 200 guests went dead silent. Luke? Julian's mother stood up from the front row, looking bewildered. What is the meaning of this? Where is Chloe? Luke didn't look at her. He stopped 3 feet away from Julian, reached into his jacket, pulled out a thick stack of printed papers, and hurled them directly into Julian's face. The papers scattered across the altar steps like white snow. They were property deeds, utility bills, hotel reservation logs spanning 4 years, and high-resolution security camera stills from the Oak Ridge neighborhood association showing Julian and Jasmine walking hand in hand through the gate. Under the Jasmine archway. You disgust me, Luke spat, his voice echoing across the silent cathedral. Both of you. You sickening, pathetic hypocrites. Julian's mother gasped, leaning over to pick up one of the papers. Her eyes widened in horror as she read the deed. Jointly owned by Julian Fall and Jasmine. Lynn. Julian. His mother whispered, her voice cracking. What is this? Julian stood frozen on the steps. His eyes darted across the floor looking at the photos of him holding Jasmine in the rain, at the dates stamped on the hotel receipts, dates that matched the exact weekends he had told Chloe he was working 36-hour shifts in the trauma unit. In the second row, Jasmine collapsed into her seat, burying her face in her hands, weeping hysterically. I can explain. Julian choked out, his voice thin and hollow. Don't bother, Luke said coldly, turning on his heel. My lawyers are filing for an annulment this afternoon. And if I were you, Julian, I'd worry less about your wedding and more about your medical license. Because the hospital board is going to love hearing about how you used emergency shift swaps to cover your weekend getaways. Luke walked out, slamming the heavy wooden doors behind him. Julian stood alone under the stained glass windows, surrounded by his weeping family, his ruined reputation, and 200 staring guests. He slowly looked down at his hands, the hands that had designed a dress named Pure Jasmine, the hands that had poured strawberry jam for a girl who hated strawberries, the hands that had held Chloe for 10 years while dreaming of her sister. For the first time in his life, he couldn't smell anything. He could only feel the cold, suffocating weight of an empty church, and the terrifying realization that the quiet, obedient girl he had taken for granted had walked away, taking his entire world with her. I rented a small 4-wheel drive camper van in Reykjavik and drove south along the ring road. The Icelandic landscape in late autumn was an alien expanse of black lava, fields, golden moss, and towering glaciers shrouded in heavy mist. There were no trees, no billboards, and no crowds. For 3 days, I drove through the solitude. Whenever the sensory memories of the past 10 years tried to creep back into my mind, the fake vanilla, the bitter scent of Julian's hidden grief, the metallic tang of Jasmine's sisterly guilt, I would park the van on the shoulder of the road, step out into the wind, and inhale deeply. I learned the sense of the earth. I learned that glacier water smelled of old oxygen and stone. I learned that moss smelled of ancient green safety. I learned that volcanic ash smelled of fire that had long since cooled down into peace. My sense of smell, the curse that had forced me to absorb everyone else's emotional garbage for 23 years, began to recalibrate. On the 4th day, I reached a small coastal village named Vic. I checked into a small wood-paneled guest house perched on a cliff overlooking the black sand beach. The owner was an elderly woman named Freya, who wore hand-knitted wool sweaters and kept a pot of fish soup simmering on the stove all day. When I checked in, Freya looked at my pale face and the dark circles under my eyes, then pushed a mug of steaming thyme tea across the wooden counter. You travel alone? Freya asked in slow, soft English. Yes, I murmured, taking the mug. She looked at me for a moment, her eyes kind and sharp. In her presence, I caught a scent I had rarely encountered in my old life. A soft, dry warmth like baked bread and dried pine needles. It was the smell of contentment. Uncomplicated, quiet, and completely self-contained. The sea here is loud, Freya said gently, handing me a heavy iron key. It washes away the noise people bring from the cities. Sleep well, child. I took the key and went up to my room. That night, I slept for 10 straight hours without dreaming. When I woke up, the sun was rising over the Atlantic Ocean, casting a pale pink light across the black basalt columns on the shore below my window. I sat at the small wooden desk in my room, opened my laptop, and connected to the guest house Wi-Fi for the first time since landing in Iceland. I didn't open social media. I opened my bank app. I transferred my personal savings, money I had earned from my own career as a freelance graphic designer, kept strictly separate from Julian's accounts, into a fresh Icelandic bank account I had opened in Reykjavik. Then I opened my work email. There was a message from my chief client, an international publishing house based in London. They were asking if I was available to illustrate a new series of botanical books focusing on northern flora. I typed back a single sentence. I'm available, and I'm already in the north. I closed the laptop, feeling a strange, quiet fluttering in my chest. It wasn't happiness, not yet. The wound was still too raw, the betrayal still too fresh. But it was space. For 10 years, my life had been crammed into the narrow margins of Julian and Jasmine's secret romance. I had been the cover story, the screen, the convenient third wheel that allowed them to play their tragic, holy game of sacrifice. Now the margins were gone. The whole page was mine. A week later, the piece was shattered. I was sitting in a small cafe in Vic, sketching a cluster of Arctic poppies in my notebook, when the cafe door chimed. The scent hit my nostrils 3 seconds before I saw him. It was a foul, curdled stench, a mixture of stale sweat, cheap alcohol, burning copper, and a bitter, suffocating desperation that made my throat instantly constrict. I looked up from my sketchbook. Julian stood in the doorway of the cafe. He looked unrecognizable. The polished, immaculate surgeon who always wore pressed shirts and smelled of luxury cologne was gone. He wore an oversized rain-soaked parka, his dark hair unkempt and greasy, his jaw covered in several days of dark stubble. His eyes were bloodshot, rimmed with deep purple shadows. Behind him, hovering near the glass door like a ghost, was Jasmine. She wore a beige wool coat, her face pale, thin, and entirely stripped of her usual delicate beauty. She looked like a flower that had been plucked and left to wither in the sun. The entire cafe fell quiet as the two foreign strangers stepped inside. Julian scanned the small room until his eyes landed on me sitting by the window. A ragged, choking sound escaped his throat. He took 3 desperate strides forward, slamming his hands onto the edge of my small wooden table. "Chloe," he rasped, his voice trembling so hard he could barely pronounce my name. "Chloe, I found you." I didn't jump. I didn't scream. I didn't drop my pencil. I carefully set my sketchbook flat on the table, capped my pen with a small click, and looked up at the man I had loved for 10 years. The smell radiating off him was overwhelming. It was the sharp, stinging spice of rage mixed with the black, oily rot of total despair. It was so potent it made my eyes water slightly. "You shouldn't be here, Julian," I said, my voice quiet, even, and entirely devoid of heat. "The weather forecast said there's a blizzard coming from the north. The mountain passes are closing." Julian stared at me, his mouth opening and closing as if he couldn't process my calm tone. "The mountain passes?" he shouted, his voice cracking hysterically, drawing looks from 2 local fishermen sitting nearby. "You leave me at the altar, you ruin my life, you ruin your sister's life, you post a photo that destroys everything, and you're talking about the weather forecast?" From behind him, Jasmine stepped forward, tears instantly spilling over her eyelashes. "Chloe," Jasmine whimpered, reaching out a trembling hand toward my shoulder. "Chloe, please, listen to us, it's not what you think." "Don't touch me," I said softly. My voice wasn't raised, but the sheer, absolute coldness in it made Jasmine's hand freeze in midair. She pulled her arm back, as if she had been burned by dry ice. "Chloe, please." Julian dropped to his knees right beside my table, ignoring the cold hardwood floor, his bloodshot eyes pleading up at me. "I know you're mad. I know you saw the house. I know you heard us at the wedding." "I heard you 3 years ago, Julian," I interrupted gently. Julian froze. "What?" "In the stairwell at Jasmine's wedding 3 years ago," I said, looking down at his face. "I stood right outside the door. I heard you punching the wall. I heard you asking her to run away with you. I heard her telling you to stay with me for the rest of your life." The silence in the cafe turned suffocating. Julian's face drained of every remaining drop of color. He looked like a corpse. You knew," he whispered, his chest heaving wildly. "For 3 years. You knew?" "I didn't know everything back then," I said, leaning back against my chair, crossing my arms. "I didn't know about the cottage in Oak Ridge. I didn't know about the weekend shift swaps. I didn't know you designed a dress named Pure Jasmine for my wedding." Jasmine let out a sharp gasp, covering her mouth, stumbling back against the counter. "I only put all the pieces together last week," I continued, looking between the 2 of them. "And do you know what I realized? Neither of them spoke. I realize that both of you are pathetic, I said. The word fell into the room like a heavy stone. You, I pointed at Julian, are a coward who didn't have the guts to pursue the woman you wanted, so you used me as a placeholder to satisfy your ego and keep yourself close to her family. And you, I looked at Jasmine, are a hypocrite who pretended to be the selfless, protective older sister while stealing my fiancé behind my back, feeding on his secret devotion to feel special while marrying another man for his money. Chloe, no. Jasmine sobbed, dropping to her knees beside Julian, her hands clutching her head. I loved you. I did everything to protect you. I tried to break up with him 100 times. I told him we couldn't hurt you. You told him not to hurt me while sleeping in a bed surrounded by jasmine flowers 5 miles from my house. I spat, my voice finally carrying a sliver of venom. You didn't protect me, Jasmine. You protected your own conscience. You wanted to play the noble martyr who sacrificed her love for her little sister, while keeping the lover in your back pocket. Chloe. Julian wept, reaching out to grasp the hem of my sweater. I was wrong. I was stupid. But I swear to God, over those 10 years, I grew to care for you. I built a home with you. I cooked for you every day. That wasn't fate. I looked down at his hand touching my sweater. In my mind, I remembered the sweet vanilla scent he had projected for 10 years. The smell that had comforted me through my parents' death, through my college years, through every sickness I had ever suffered. And then looking at him now, I finally understood the truth about my ability. Vanilla wasn't the smell of love. Vanilla was the smell of perfume. For 10 years, Julian hadn't been radiating genuine sweetness. He had been intentionally manufacturing a smell, using his deliberate tenderness, his cooking, his gentle smiles as a thick, artificial fragrance to cover up the foul, bitter rot of his betrayal. He hadn't loved me. He had been medicating me with comfort so I wouldn't look too closely at the darkness in his heart. I grabbed his wrist and firmly, deliberately, removed his fingers from my sweater. It was fake, Julian, I said softly. It was the most disgusting lie I've ever lived through. Outside the cafe windows, the sky had turned from slate gray to an eerie, bruised black. The wind began to howl, picking up loose volcanic dust and swirling white snow across the street in violent sheets. Freya, the guest house owner, stepped out from the kitchen, her expression stern. The storm is here, Freya announced loudly in Icelandic and then in English. The police have closed Road 1. No cars are allowed on the asphalt until tomorrow noon. Everyone must stay indoors. She looked at Julian and Jasmine kneeling on the floor. You too, Freya said coldly, pointing toward the small reception area near the door. If you are staying, pay for a room. If not, the storm will flip your car into the sea within 20 minutes. Julian stood up slowly, wiping his face with the back of his coat sleeve. He looked hollowed out, as if his soul had been sucked out of his mouth. Jasmine sat on a wooden chair near the heater, shivering uncontrollably, weeping softly into her hands. I didn't stay in the dining room with them. I picked up my sketchbook, walked up the narrow wooden stairs to my second floor room and locked the heavy deadbolt. That night, the blizzard raged over Vic. The wind battered the wooden walls of the guest house, making the timber creak. Like a ship at sea, snow piled up against the window panes, obscuring the view of the black beach below. I sat on my bed, wrapped in a thick wool blanket, listening to the storm. Around 2 a.m., a soft, tentative knock sounded at my door. Chloe. It was Jasmine's voice. She sounded tiny, fragile, and utterly broken through the thick wood. Chloe, please open the door. Just for 5 minutes. I'm so cold. I didn't move from the bed. I didn't answer. Chloe. She sobbed, her forehead pressing against the outside panel of the door. Luke left me. He's taking the house, the car, everything. The family. Everyone back home knows. They're calling me a snake. They're calling me a monster. You are a monster, Jasmine, I said softly to the quiet room, not caring if she heard me through the wood or not. I have no one left, Chloe. She screamed out, her voice pitching into a pathetic, desperate wail. Our parents are dead. You're my only family. How can you just discard me like this? How can I discard you? I closed my eyes. I remembered being 8 years old, sitting on the cold floor of the hospital corridor after the car crash that took our parents. Jasmine had been 9. She had held my hand, squeezed it tight, and said, Don't cry, Chloe. I'll be your mom and dad now. I'll never leave you. She had kept that promise for 15 years, until a handsome boy with a sweet vanilla smile walked into our lives, and she decided that her secret desires were worth more than her sister's heart. You discarded me first, Jasmine, I murmured into the dark. 5 years ago, when you bought that house in Oak Ridge. On the other side of the door, the weeping gradually subsided into quiet, shuddering gasps. A few minutes later, heavy, slow footsteps approached the door. It was Julian. Jasmine, come back to your room. Julian's voice sounded dead, stripped of all emotion. She's not going to open the door. Julian. Jasmine whimpered. What are we going to do? I don't know, Julian said quietly. My chief called me 3 hours ago. The hospital board has suspended me pending an ethics investigation. My father told me not to come home for Christmas. There was a long silence in the hallway outside my room. We destroyed everything, Jasmine whispered. For nothing. We destroyed everything. No, Julian replied, his voice echoing hollowly against the wooden floorboards. We destroyed everything for a lie. I heard their footsteps drag down the hallway, fading away into the roar of the wind outside. I leaned my head back against the wall, closed my eyes, and listened to the blizzard. For the first time in 10 years, I felt no pain, no anger, no bitterness, no desire for revenge. I simply felt clean. The storm passed by mid-afternoon the next day. When I stepped down to the lobby at 10 in the morning, the sun was shining brilliantly over a world turned entirely white. The snow drifted 6 feet high against the guesthouse walls, sparkling under the crisp, clear blue sky like powdered diamonds. Julian and Jasmine were already gone. Freya told me they had checked out at first light, as soon as the snowplows cleared the main road. The man looked like a shadow, Freya remarked, wiping down the wooden tables. And the woman couldn't stop shaking. They drove back toward the airport. Good, I said softly. I walked out of the guest house and took the narrow hiking trail leading down to the black sand beach. The sea was roaring, dark green waves crashing against the jet black shore, sending white spray soaring 20 feet into the freezing air. The contrast between the pure white snow, the black sand, and the deep blue ocean was blindingly beautiful. I walked to the edge of the water. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the gold engagement ring Julian had given me 6 months ago. The ring I had forgotten was still tucked into the lining of my coat, and held it in my palm. It was a beautiful diamond, flawless and clear. I looked at it for 2 seconds. Then, with a casual sweeping motion of my arm, I hurled it far out into the Atlantic Ocean. The gold flashed once in the sunlight before plunging into the icy black waves, swallowed instantly by the roaring sea. I wiped my hands on my jeans, pulled my wool scarf up around my nose, and took a long, slow breath. The air entering my lungs was freezing, sharp and pure. It smelled of salt. It smelled of ozone. It smelled of volcanic earth. And beneath all of that, deep inside my own chest, for the very first time in my life, I caught a new scent. It wasn't vanilla. It wasn't strawberry. It wasn't the sharp, bitter tang of someone else's grief or greed. It was a soft, delicate sweetness, like fresh honey and blooming snow crocuses, pushing through the winter frost. It was the smell of my own life, quiet and whole, beginning anew. I turned my back on the ocean, walked up the sunlit path toward the village, and didn't look back again.